But the one that causes the most angst for most creatives is this thing we call incubation. You're supposed to just put some ideas in your head and get some stimulus, and just hopefully as you walk around or you ride your bike or you take a shower or perhaps you go for a jog, that these ideas will just jump in your head. Well, as a professional creative, I will share with you, oftentimes in a conference room, in a very sterile environment with tons and tons of constraints, a CEO will turn to me and say, you got 20 minutes, I need $1 million idea. And so how do we jumpstart the incubation process? Well, it starts with some very interesting cognitive tricks that you have to use as tactics. They're not tricks in the fact that they're tricky or you don't know what they are. They're a way to help you filter and assess how you're going to think about the information that you're looking at. Now, creativity oftentimes gets a bad rap because people think brainstorming is dead. Brainstorming is simply changed. Brainstorming was invented in a time before the internet, so it literally was nothing more than a group of people getting together to create a knowledge network. Knowledge network, or distributed innovation, if you're familiar with that term, is literally how every idea comes about. Even if you're an inventor of one, distributive innovation is a part of your life because you're influenced by everything that you see and experience and process. I love it because we know that we live now today in an information-enriched environment. And so the way in which people access information changes the game. I'm a big believer that every university in any country around the world should require all freshmen to take a class on search. How do you search the internet for stimulus? Because all the great ideas that you need to find, or all the assets or the ingredients to come up with the next big idea, are right before you. I think this generation is poised to be the greatest generation because they have the most amount of information at their fingertips. Yet we don't spend time teaching them how to adequately search. And I don't care whether you're a doctoral student or a freshman undecided, the key to unlocking your ability to be creative comes from how to search what you're trying to find. Because when we do research on creativity, most people won't share the ideas that they have when asked to share them for a variety of reasons we could probably talk about during our time together. But you know, there's that old cliche, just think outside the box. Challenge is, no one's ever stopped to think about what the box actually represents in that metaphor. Well, the box literally is your perception of reality right at this time. And for most students, their reality is about as far as they can reach, right? They're very familiar with the world that's contextually familiar, and most of the ideas come from that familiarity. My idea for a new business, I'm going to take a bar with a laundromat with an ability to have some fun. We're going to have a putting green or golf simulator. And oh, by the way, we'll deliver meals too. And this now becomes the core idea because they're just synthesizing, because they've heard that creativity is nothing more than synthesizing a bunch of random things. And they think that's a new idea. Couldn't be further from the truth. So what we really have to recognize is that the box is your level of perception right now. You can't leave the box. You bring your box with you. It's just about expanding the box. And most students don't spend enough time expanding the world that they hang around in when it comes to thinking ideas. But I like to ask a bigger question, and that is, we often say, hey, Stamp, help me help my students be more creative. But I have a good question for you all. Can you actually be too creative? And the answer in an entrepreneurial context is absolutely. You can be too creative because the goal of the creative in an entrepreneurial context is that the creator has to be able to convert what they perceive as valuable into something that is actually transactionally valuable. I've watched a lot of entrepreneurs with ideas in their head at meetups and networking events who never act on those ideas because they can't figure out how to convert an idea to an asset. Being in the Department of Applied Economics, the field of behavioral economics is rife with trying to understand how the context of how a new idea affects the change that people will perceive in their world in the future. So it is very important right now to be good at creativity as an entrepreneur. Now, I love to ask this question. What gets in the way of your creative thinking? Well, it turns out the most important thing that gets in the way is your own memory, because of how you memorize what you see the world as. Here's one of my favorite examples. Every day in class in the first 5 weeks, I just bring random objects into class. And I start in the very first day. Here's one of my favorites, because this is a worldwide example that anyone around the world is familiar with. If I hold this up and say, what is this? All of you look at me and like, Stamp, that's a ping pong paddle. And that's, of course, what you've memorized. Somewhere along the way, someone told you this is not a bird, this is not a dog, this is not a can opener, this is a ping pong paddle. And so if someone were to say, what is this? And I were to say a can opener, they'd go, you're absolutely crazy. But the creative goes, is it? Could it be a can opener? Could I actually convert this thing into something that could open up a can? I don't know, maybe a can is the wrong dimension. How about a jar where I can't get the jar lid off? What if I were to cut a V into this thing so I could actually put it on the jar and then use this as a lever to torque and open that jar? And people go, well, that's not fair. You have some engineering background. You understand the concept of torque. Maybe I understand it from a physics point of view, but maybe I understand it from a leverage point of view, from just general experience. The thing is, students have to be able to first ask a question before they can address a problem. And we don't spend enough time asking questions. We spend most of our time in education just answering questions. So when I tell my students to say, hey, let's imagine we have a warehouse with 1 million of these ping pong paddles in it, and everybody who wants a ping pong paddle has one. So everybody, you're out there right now. What could we convert these things into? You know, we could make it a fly swatter. We could make it a fan on a hot day. We could make it a paddle if we had to on a really shallow boat, right? There's lots of things we could do with this. We could use it to, we could put texture on it and use it as a way to paint on the walls. And I challenge the students to say, what are 20 or 30 different ideas for this paddle? And they go, oh my gosh, 20 or 30 ideas, that's too many. Can we have 5? And that's the limitation, is seeing that there isn't enough malleability in this thing to convert it into something else. And the reason is they don't understand what to do with the stimulus. Here's a clue. Convert it. Notice how when I ask people what this thing is, I'm holding it by the handle. Again, another memorized activity. If I would have put this thing and held it like this and said, this is a, what is this? You'd be like, why is he holding it that way? Because the way we're familiar with the world is the way we see it as memorized. The first thing you have to recognize is if we have 1 million of these in a warehouse and we can't use these as ping pong paddles, the paddle is no longer in our vocabulary. It now has to become something else. And they realize, well, can I take it apart? You see, in creativity, you don't need permission to change the world. Take it out of the box, forget the memorization, and say, what is it made out of? We actually did a competition. We gave a $1,000 prize to a group of graduate students and said, who can create the best business plan for 1 million of these ping pong paddles if they're only worth 10 cents a piece and we can't sell them as paddles? Let's create something of actual value. We had 6 teams. They went and did a whole bunch of things, and it was really quite fascinating what they came up with. One group of students said, well, they couldn't get past the whole paddle thing. So they said, well, let's say we have crossing guards at every school at the intersection. This means stop. This means go. We could put green on here and everybody will know stop and go. And you need 2 in each hand, 1 in each hand. That's 2. Every corner of a school has 4 different intersections. So each school needs at least 4 sets. We can charge $10 a pair. And they made a beautiful business plan. Well done. Nice. Like that. Now you could say, but Jeff, we already have crossing guard emblems. The question is, can you compete? So we went on to the next group. Well, because this is a game, they decided, well, maybe we put some Velcro on it and we'll put a ball that will stick to the paddle and we'll just create a new kind of game. Okay, that's fair. I've had other students who went, wait a minute, this thing can push air. What if I drilled a hole in it and now I could make this as a way to make something that could make a fan? Okay, there's an idea. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ideas. And yet I had one group of students that did the magical aha. The one where it really was a step change in how they viewed this opportunity. They asked a question first. Well, what do these 2 things have in common? It's made of wood and it's made of rubber. And then they went on the internet. Wood and rubber, wood and rubber. Look at these materials. What are they made of? And they were not engineers. They weren't material science majors. They weren't technically oriented. They just went out and searched. And they found that wood and rubber are both natural tree components. They're natural. And they thought, where could I do with these? And they also found out that wood and rubber have high R, a thing called an R value for insulation. And they pieced these things together. Next thing they decided to do, well, let's grind these up. Let's grind these up, put a flame retardant material on it, and now we have a natural green-centric insulation for home attics in places where, one, economic disparity is such that they can't afford expensive fiberglass insulation and more eco-friendly than fiberglass insulation. These paddles went from 10 cents a piece to $10 a piece. The key thing was they had a big step change in what this could be because they left it behind on what they'd memorized it had to be. And again, this is the big part of creativity that's so important. How do you ask the better question? So what tends to happen in our classes when we ask students to create ideas is we start too big and we don't honor the process of asking enough questions. We don't give them enough time to practice, practice, practice. I'll bring in all kinds of things. I'll go, what is this? And they'll go, it's a pen. Okay, what does a ballpoint pen do? It's a device that has a volume in it that holds something in it where you could push this and then this comes out and then this does some stuff. If we break it apart, this could be very, very cool as some way to do something. And they have to go and search. Some of the best things I've ever seen is a drug delivery kit. Obviously, you've seen an EpiPen, and I'll go, yeah, we got those. Where else could this be useful? Well, in very unique applications in industry or in providing and putting in hair color and doing streaking. You see, the thing is, you have to let go of this as a writing instrument, but you have to understand that what a writing instrument does is communicate. So whatever comes out of here must, by definition, communicate from here to where it's acting. Notice all we do is ask the question, what is a cause? What is an effect? How do these things move back and forth? And that becomes quite a great way to do this. Now, the key part about it is providing examples. You see, my job isn't to tell them what this becomes. That's their job. All I do is walk in with my magic grocery bag every week, and I just pull something out, and I go, hey, what is this? Go. I need 20 new things that this can be. And they know that this is a part of the entrepreneurial excitement of change as a constant partner to an entrepreneur. So the key thing is that what we have to look at is this process of asking the bigger question of what can we do to change problems that are defined problems into those that are more ill-defined? Because the defined problem space is always too comfortable. What is this? That's a defined problem. Their answer is a ping pong paddle. You see, a defined problem has a convergent thinking stratus. And so in that particular framework, there is an answer. Because if I were to say this is a horse, people would laugh. But the question is, why does that become the memory location? Because defined problems are actually, in the world of the creative, sometimes they're a little boring, but there are times where it's important to have defined problems. What is the first day of the year? January 1. We all agree it. That's called a calendar year. We all agree it keeps continuity and order. Most large organizations love continuity, efficiency, and order, which is why creativity is a separate set of skills. Because the ill-defined questions require divergent thinking. And they also require us to recognize that it's not about an answer, but a portfolio of answers that have different probabilities of outcome. And our job as entrepreneurs is to maximize the return out of that opportunity. That's our key challenge of what we have to do. So I always love to do these things. And if you want to, you can play along and put it in the chat window. I love to see some of your ideas because these will be recorded. And I love to do these. I did this earlier this morning. How is a team like a chair? This is a great question to ask your class. Give them 20 minutes and tell them to justify their answer. Tell me the story of how you see it. Now, they realize, well, and I take away the easy one. I could go, well, a chair has 4 legs, and so the chair and a team have to be stable so that the chair doesn't tip over. A team can't tip over. So everybody has to pull their own weight and be equal, support all the issues. I take that one off the table. Now they're mad because that was the defined answer. Everyone can see that one. Now they have to try to figure out, well, there's the back of a chair, there's the fabric of the chair, there's the cushion of the chair, there's the arms of the chair, there's the wheels of the chair, what the chair is made out of, what is a chair? What if I had a three-legged stool? I tell them, you can change it. Just try to get the storyline. Tell me the story. How is a team like a chair? Now, it may seem like this is a silly question, Jeff. That's because ill-defined questions resist the rubric of certainty. And when we resist the rubric of certainty, it makes certain individuals anxious. And so you have to be able to say, anxiousness is a function of what I haven't been able to value. And when you get the story that connects how a team in a chair makes sense, then the value is created. It's very entrepreneurial that your ideas, even in your head, have to create value because that's why you would be able to share them. When I say that a team has 4 legs and everyone supports a team, you all go, yeah, I see that. See, we just transacted that idea mentally. It becomes a basic part of how we transfer ideas to each other. Now, in the professional world, people think that when we're professional creatives, our job is to create products. No, that's what people sell at the end of the day. Our job is to establish a creative expectation that whatever we put together has some sort of superior outcome. It's the superior outcome of all the choices that fits the interface between a market, a customer need, someone's ability to transact, operations, logistics, resources, all the things in the business plan. Yes, very, very important. And that's where the concept of the pivot is also creative. But the creative's job isn't to define an answer. It's to provide a way to predict how an idea will change as a function of the future. So all a great idea has to have in order to become a great next new ventures has to have novelty, has to be new and different, and it has to provide some sense of utility. Now everyone can start to dig in and analyze it. One of my favorite examples was in our current times, I talk about what some certain things are. Last fall at my university, because we live in a very cold climate, they gave out to everybody at the football game these neck warmers. Now notice, this is just a piece of fabric with our logo on it that has, you put it, I won't model it right now, but you could put it over your head and it keeps your neck warm. And one of my students went, wait a minute, we handed out 50,000 of these. I wonder if there's any more left. So we went to the university and said, hey, do you have any more of these left? Because this was the new ping pong paddle. And everybody out there knows exactly with the way the world is turned right now, what could we turn this into? Absolutely. This became the basis for a logo, University of Minnesota face mask for all the students when they come back on campus. And guess what? We already had those resources under control. This made me very happy as a professor because I realized after they've graduated from my class, they still retain the basic process of questioning what is this thing and what can I turn it into? So the key part about it is that everything related around novelty and utility and the outcome probability of being able to produce that superior outcome is designed to solve a problem. Too many ideas are in search of a problem. For example, drones. I have students every semester that want to do some sort of drone project. And I go, why? Drones are cool. Don't disagree. But the challenge is, what will the drone do that's novel, has utility that I can't already do some other way at a better approach? So it isn't just magical thinking. I like to call it tactical magical thinking. How do I get a superior outcome? So the challenge is that the answer to any question in the creative's mind is it depends. And we have to figure about what it depends on. And it depends, as you can tell, on a context driven by perception. Now, I've been sharing with you some ideas of how do you let your mind go to create these wonderful ideas. Now I'm going to ask you another question. I'm going to show you how easy it is, like a rubber band, to whipsaw back and go right back to defined thinking. Here's one of my favorite questions. What was the first internet? Now I'm going to pause for a moment and I'm going to let you answer this question. What was the first internet? Now, I'm going to be fascinated by what you're going to write down, because it might be something like the ARPANET, or there were 10 universities that decided to share research information, right? But you see, if the answer to this question is it depends, then why isn't this a possible answer? The internet was this picture, a railroad and an engine with cars on it. Because what is the internet? It's nothing more than a delivery system for packets of information from point A to point B. Isn't that a picture of an implement that delivers packets of information and people and resources from point A to point B? So now becomes the race of go back in time. When was the first internet? You could say, well, it was the canal system, or it was the ocean, or it was the first Roman road. People from all over the world, from whatever culture you're from, you're going to want to vote for your earliest version of how did people take packets of information and move them from point A to point B. Do you see the exciting part about the creative adventure is the stories that it creates, because this unlocks the possibility of, if we had to find better ways to move packets of information to point A to point B, maybe the internet isn't the best way to do that. You see, we have to look at what is the context and the perception of the problem that we are trying to address to find that superior outcome. It always depends on the scope of the question. And that's why creativity isn't about answering questions, it's about asking them first. We'll leave the entrepreneurs to figure out how to answer enough questions to satisfy all the investors, which is always humorous to me, because in every pitch, what's the first thing that happens after a pitch? Questions. Great, but those are convergent questions most of the time. So everywhere we go, the answer to any question is dependent on the context driven by its perception. Okay, one of the other key activities you can do in class, and I'm going to show you two, then we'll get to some questions, okay? Here's what I want you to think about. This is something everyone can do. It's called the process of writing directions. One of the most defined methods we have of taking things that are uncertain and making them more certain is to give someone a direction, to explain it to them. Say, you don't understand how to do this. This is how you paint a wall. This is how you do anything, right? Doesn't matter what it is. So the question I always have is, how good are you at taking disparate information and making it well-defined? One of my favorite things, a shoe. What is this? Everyone knows what these are, right? It's a shoelace. You know what's really hard? Write the instructions for how to tie a shoe. I kid you not. Try it sometime on your own, and for the hilarity of your class, the next time you have a class, ask your students to write the instructions for how to tie a shoe. Now here's what you do to prove the validity of the superior outcome. Group A, put 2 or 3 students together, make them work as a group. Hilarious. They won't be able to make a decision. They'll make subcommittees. They'll go on for 40 minutes, right? But when they finally get their steps together, you take their output and you hand it to a different group, make them exchange, and then you tell students, only read the instructions and do exactly as the instructions are written. Guess what's the probability of any particular group getting the instructions well enough designed so that someone could actually tie a shoe from those instructions? Less than 1 in 10. Now you may think, oh, that's just students. They just don't know much. Well, guess what? I've done it with corporate executives. I've done it with some of the biggest advertising agencies in the world, and they struggle with those instructions. One of my other favorite ones, just take any random object. I just pulled this off my desk. What is this? It's a stapler. Write the instructions for how to use a stapler. And my favorite one is students went, and I said to students, I said, well, they said, take the paper, put it in the stapler and staple it, and then you've got your paper stapled. So I took a piece of paper and I went like this. And they laughed. They all started laughing. I said, no, I just read the instructions. I'm absolutely dead serious. I go, what's wrong with having a staple in a piece of paper? And they go, Stan, you have to have multiple pieces of paper. The whole concept of a stapler is to aggregate papers together so that they're together. I go, but what does a staple on a piece of paper without just one, what does this become? And they were stuck. I said, go search for it. Turns out this little piece of paper is like a tag. It's a metallic tag. It literally could be the piece. It could be separated out. If I had paper with metal fibers in it, I could use them to separate. And they were realizing there's an idea here. We just have to figure out what we do to create value. My other favorite example is I do this. I go, take the piece of paper, put it in the stapler. How about if I do this? Then I open up the stapler and I try to put it in the stapler. And the students are giggling. And I go, but this is the context. What if I didn't understand what it means to put it in the stapler? See the danger of defined convergent thinking? It gives us a false sense of security of our superiority. This is why when people over-explain something to another person, the person receiving the information often gets offended. Why? Because it smacks against their sense of, this isn't how I do it. You see, we live naturally in an ill-defined problem world, but yet we try to constrain everything we do to be efficient in a defined problem space. We have to let that go in order to do that. So here's my favorite exercise. I brought this today just for fun. And of course, I love to do this. I'll go, what is this, right? What do you see? Now, this is a product that actually is found in almost 100 countries. So it's all over the world. So it's easy to get something like this. Now, I like this because it's a little canister. And you could say, well, Jeff, you like food. I'm like, no, I like the canister. So what I do is I bring them to class. I have them take them apart. I actually take the bag and I go, don't need the chips. Don't care about the chips. Here's our deal. This company went out of business. This company no longer exists, but we have a warehouse full of 1 million of these tubes. You have to figure out, what do I turn this tube into and what do I use it for? It's nothing more than an ingredient. And you can't put any other food in it. You can't put spaghetti in it. You can't put candy in it. You can't put no food. What's the best idea for what this could become? And I say, go. They actually get 3 weeks. Here's the criteria. You have to create ideas for what this could be. Then you have to actually prototype it. And you have to put it on Etsy and actually try to sell it. And the student who creates the best social media, how they actually create a landing page, how they put it on Etsy, and the people who actually sell some of these ideas, well, that becomes the best of the ideas for the class. That's how we actually measure their superior outcome. Can you take a vision and make it a transactionable idea? Best idea I've ever seen? They sold $10,000 worth of items from this little canister in 1 semester. I'll show you a couple of ideas that they actually did. Okay, so here's how you start doing this. You have to help the students figure out how to break down a problem. So you have to figure out, what is this thing? Well, it's a tube. It has volume. It's made with cardboard on the outside. It's got aluminum foil on the inside. It's got a metal bottom. It's got a plastic top. And guess what? You can change it anything you want. As a matter of fact, it doesn't have this printing on it. They're just silver. They're just a blank can. This is just another piece of canvas for us to create on. And so guess what we have them do? I literally tell them, take the can, take your backpack, just carry it around campus for 2 weeks. And every time you need to do something, just put it in your hand and do something with it. And this is where the magic comes. This is part of that accelerated incubation. I can't see what this thing is going to be used for until I can ask a question, what can it do? And so now they carry them around campus. You see the students walking around campus with their Pringles can, trying to figure out what this thing can do. And over the years, I have had hundreds, literally hundreds of ideas for what to turn this can into. And every semester, they know the previous ones, and they keep finding new uses for this can. And of course, you can do the entrepreneurial approach. You could say, well, pick a company. Who could you sell this idea to? Is it Trader Joe's? Is it the Girl Scouts? Again, it can't be cookies, but what else could it be? Could it be sold to a children's education company? A lot of ideas now are STEM science kits, right? This could be a good thing to hold something of value. Again, if entrepreneurs are converting resources into value, how do we do that, right? So here's my favorite part about it is they have to create a minimum viable concept. They have to create a superior outcome. And here's some of the great ideas that they come up with. Obviously, I've said things like a spaghetti holder, drinking straws, all those things are off the table. But when I see things like a fishing kit, or in Minnesota, a winter driving kit, you put some sand in it, you put some other things that you can use to get your wheels to spin. Again, there are many other things that could become a rain gauge. You could cut some flaps in it, makes a wind gauge, a hamster tube building kit. One of my favorite ones is on Saturday when they go to football games, the store that sells the t-shirts with our logos on them isn't open. So they figured out how you could roll up the t-shirts, put them in here, put them in a vending machine, and now we can vend t-shirts right on campus. No need for the bookstore to be open. Obviously, it could be used for many things that are just useful. A pooper scooper, a spy telescope. One of my favorite ones, an engineering student literally figured out, this is an antenna, figured out how to send the infrared signal so he could open up garage doors at a distance because he had an algorithm that could randomly assign the codes, and it literally worked. I said, well, maybe a little over superior outcome, but nonetheless, really interesting. Well, in the last couple of minutes, let me show you what one class did. I'll skip through here real quick and show you the outcome of what they did here. I think it should be able to do this. Okay, it wants to stick there. And I'll just blow through this real quick. I want you to see the idea. Okay, here it is. The idea was called a piñata popper. Now, this was fascinating because the problem that they came up with was this can hold some stuff. And they were doing the whole thing of the compressed snake, like a gag, like you open it up and the snake jumps out. And they said, well, that's kind of funny, but it's also kind of scary. Where could I have something that pops out of it that's fun, that solves a problem? And the key one was piñatas are very popular at birthday parties, but a piñata requires a stick. And the customer target here is, what if a mom doesn't want 4- and 5-year-olds enjoying swinging a stick and trying to hit somebody? So they said, this is a better idea because I'm going to put stuff in it, candy and confetti. I'm going to hang it upside down. It's going to have a string. And it's a safe way to let someone who's blindfolded find the string and pull on it, and everybody gets to have fun. No stick required piñata. The piñata without a stick. And you know what? That was a really good, solid beginning. They worked on all the science. They found an engineer, and they really dug in. They took the idea to a Party City store in town. They pitched the idea to the store owner, and they said, make me some. And we actually made some. We actually went out to some parties, let some kids play with them, and the students changed dramatically because they came up with something that they've never seen before. I tell them, if I can't Google it on the Google, then you must have a really good idea. And a big part of it is they realize that they can actually try and they can do things. One of the things we have them do is actually make the advertising. How do I talk about it? How do I convince moms that there is a value in this product? And the key part about it is that they realize that they could actually do something on their own. So the big part of the creative process, and I'll stop now and I will take some questions, is that the key thing about creativity is not about how much you know. It's about how much are you willing to forget in order to create something that you haven't seen before. And so as we leave this exercise, what I want you to realize is you can help your students catalyze their incubation. Start with something that asks the question, what is it? What's it made out of? What do those things do? How would I interact with it as a human? And what then, if I see big enough, if I change my perspective and change my context, how can I use this in a new and novel way that provides utility? And if I can come up with something that intrigues me, can it intrigue others? And that's the key element of how we start to drive the entrepreneurial process to begin. Because at the end of the day, and I have one slide here that I really would like to show because I want to answer that question. When I ask that question, what do entrepreneurs think about? Well, they think about a process of creating value. But what creatives think about is a process of divergent thinking in search of an opportunity. That's why in my world, entrepreneurship is just a specific subset of creativity in an economic market. It's the outcome of your creative process that's in search of an opportunity. And when I search for that opportunity and pursue it, I may just start a brand new venture. Well, there's my formal presentation. I'm more than happy to attack some of these questions. And yes, I have those resources. There's a link on my bio for the conference, but they're right here. So you should be able to see these. You should be able to see these the links to where you find these slides. Here, I'll put it back up on here. There you go. You can copy that down. All right. I think that this by the way, I've actually used this particular approach in an entrepreneurial finance class.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go for it. Question?
Great, fantastic. So let me ask you some questions here, so we can start the discussion here a little bit here. You know, what are some of the resources that you can have available for faculty to use in their classrooms?
Well, the next time you're shopping, just pick up anything. I'm a big fan of I've even brought in just a pair of blue jeans and just said, what is this? Go do something with it, right? Take it apart. And it was fascinating that students actually came up with an idea about the fact that the metal components in a blue jeans, there's people who are allergic to the metal. And so they wanted to create blue jeans that had no metal in them. And that was a very interesting activity. I have a bunch of students that are athletes, and they came in and I said, you guys spend all your time sitting in the gym lifting these things. I said, have you ever thought what it could be? And they went, no, I'm just, how many times can I lift it? And it started with a whole semester of what does a barbell, what could it do other than just be a weight for exercise? Now, if you say to yourself, I'm stuck, how do I get past it being an exercise tool? Like I said, first, deconstruct it, look at the cause and effect. Watch my first video from this morning, make a network map of affect and effect, and you'll be able to see how this moves into a new space of activity.
There's so many questions here. Can you talk a little bit about design thinking? Everybody's design thinking is very popular. Can you maybe share some comments and ideas about design thinking?
Well, I like design thinking, but before we can work on design thinking, we got to figure out what are we going to design thinking about. So everything I'm talking about is stuff upstream from the design thinking process. First, you actually have to have a concept. And so what I work with my students all the time, we do a lot of design thinking, we do a lot of agile methodology, but the key part about it is I love design thinking, but that's the questions you ask after you've figured out what the thing is that you're going to test in this process. And oftentimes this is where students get stuck because they go, I got nothing, or I have something that's weak. And then the design thinking process reveals through one of my favorite parts is if you take something as simple as this and you say, well, what are the instructions? Interview somebody. How do you do it? This is how you teach people how to do voice of customer work, is simply ask each other, what can this be? What would you use it for? How do you see this? And so in our creative process, we try to get students to interact and communicate, because an idea of one is not a business. If you can't get it out of your head, you can't turn it into an asset.
There's a question, or there's a comment saying here, if you talk a little bit about creativity and innovation in your own words, we use these words interchangeably. Maybe you can clarify a little bit what creativity and innovation is.
Okay, so I have a very defined opinion about this. So it's my opinion. I've read so many papers on this, and there's a lot of complexity and overlap, but I'll be real subtle about this as a professional. I'll use my professional creative card on this one. Creativity is the process of discovery. Innovation actually is at the end of that process, which is a confirmation by a customer that what you created was valuable to them. Creatives don't get to say, I just invented an innovative product. No, you created a really good concept. After you've put it in the market and you have validated from hypothesis that someone is willing to transact that with you sufficiently that makes that a sustainable business that's different than somebody else, now that's an innovation. Innovation, in my estimation, is defined by the end consumer and the industry or culture, not by the creator. The creator has the ability to say, this is novel and this has utility. Now we begin the process. So to me, I see them as two very separate functions. And the process of making something innovative is actually in the entrepreneurial sphere. How do we have a wedge entry in a marketplace where we can define it? So it does have the ability to end up being innovative, but the definition of innovation is an endpoint to me. Does that make sense?
I 100% agree with you, and I support your idea. Absolutely. I'm on your bandwagon here. There's a question that comes in, says, can you share your syllabus or syllabi? And I guess you create one every semester. So I guess
yep.
your treasure trove.
I can. It's a little bit hard to share the syllabi only because it's simply exercise 1, exercise 2, and I bring in random things. You know, Kirk mentions that he divides his students up to make a lemonade stand business. Well, here's something, Kirk. Don't make it lemonade. Just give them something else and say, okay, what if it's a lemonade stand for after 5 o'clock in neighborhoods and it's an adult lemonade stand? Or it's not lemonade at all. What else could be transactionable? And I love to let students create what they really love and what they like. And we take them down to the farmer's market. One of the fun parts about it is just get them off of campus. Every town's got a farmer's market. Take something and say, here's a bunch of chocolate, and put chocolate on something, create the concept, create the market, create the customer, create the packaging, create the advertising, create your pitch, and let's go down and see if you can sell it at the farmer's market. That's a lot of fun, because now it's a real world crucible that lets them have to sweat a little bit about what is it that they're creating, and they take real ownership of the process.
So I'm going to end it with one last question, because
Sure.
you have to that. But here's a question: 1 minute or less, you have to answer this. What could you do with 500 students in a lecture hall in 1 hour? In 1 hour.
Okay. Well, the biggest group I've ever done a brainstorming session is 1,200 lawyers in the Moscone Center in San Francisco. And you want to find a hard group of people to do creativity? Use lawyers. Actually, you can do any of these things as you want in any size group. I can take this activity and everybody has to bring one. I tell everybody, go buy a can of Pringles, bring it to class. We're all going to have snacks together, because I believe you need to be nutritiously, inspired. And so they bring it. They don't realize what we're going to do. You don't have to think that creativity requires a lot of money and a lot of resources and a lot of tools. A blank piece of paper and a pen and some provocative questions. Watch my video from this morning. I just take pictures of a hospital waiting room is a great place of stimulus. A mall, an empty store. You don't have to have a lot of fancy tools. You just have to let the imagination go. What is this? Deconstruct it and use the methodology.
Absolutely. Dr. Stamp, Alex unfortunately was caught up doing some other things, but we are a team here. CEAS and ICSB is a team here. So the president of ICSB, all the way from Egypt, Cairo, Egypt, has jumped in, and he wants to close the session, and thank you. Mr. Osman?
Hello, Ayman. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Yes. Alex, this was a great session. We all really enjoyed it, and I've seen lots of great questions coming up, and lots of I've been receiving, Jeff, lots of WhatsApps, lots of messages on the app. So this was great. It was very, very informative, and I thank you very much on behalf of ICSB and the organizers.
Well, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure.
You have a standing invitation from ICSB next time we physically meet here, but also virtually here. We want to thank everybody. You had basically over 100 for the full event, and then the other one, people are saying to me, he's stealing the internet. So I want to tell you, you stole the internet today, Dr. Stamp.
Well, I've spoken at ICSB a couple of times around the world over the years, and I always enjoy doing live sessions, because everybody knows if we're going to get together, we're not going to talk, we're going to create. So it's always a blast, everybody.
Great. Thank you. Welcome. And thank you all. And now we're going to take 10 minutes. We're going to start the other sessions exactly in 7 minutes. We have 2 sessions: reimagining student engagement, tech tools for the new normal and the next normal. And also the next session is discussions with entrepreneurship professional organizations. I want to thank you all. We'll end this session and see you in less than 5 minutes. Thank you, Dr. Staff.
Right.
Wonderful.
Thanks so much. You bet.